So what does the title mean? There is the attempted and then there is erasure. So now I know that attempted means that it didn't complete, and that's what I try to do with this book, is to show that there was an attempt to erase a group of people in South Africa, and that group of people were classified as colored starting from 1828 with Ordinance 50, which makes the colored identity a very problematic identity in South Africa. So from 1828 onwards, there was only two types of racial classifications in South Africa. You were either European or you were colored. There was no black, there was no Indian, there was no other groups. Within the colored grouping, there were subcategories of being colored. It means you can be a Fingo, which is very offensive. You could be the K word, you can be Hottentot, or you can be Bushman. Now, even Hottentot and Bushman is offensive terms. We don't use these terms anymore. But that was the subcategories under the colored identity. So from the subsequent censuses, 1865, 1875, 1895, the categories of the colored people in South Africa keep growing and growing. So at one point, 1895, you had Tswana, you have Xhosa, you have Sotho, you have different groups in the colored identity. It was only in 1911, after the union of South Africa, that a third racial group was introduced, and that was the black or native category. So since 1911, the racial landscape of South Africa is actually set up until today, and pretty much hasn't changed. In 1950, if you look at the 1950 Population Registration Act, a lot of people believe that part of that racial classification in that specific act, it included Indian people. That's actually a lie. The Indian people at first was used as a subcategory, and later in the population registration was put as a different racial category. But in terms of law, since 1828 up until 1950, there was those three type of racial categories, and it sets the racial landscape for South Africa. Now, the reason why this, we had to classify or put people in this particular racial categories is because of the apartheid and colonial projects, how we can divide people into groups. So what this book does, it takes you in detail through that step. It shows you who participated in the erasure. So some people would think the erasure started in South Africa. The South African colonial project and apartheid project is a project that started with the Valladolid debate in Spain in 1551. So there was a debate between two groups of people. So the one was Sepulveda, and the other one, I can't get to his name now, but they had a debate over, could we regard the Native Americans as human? Do they have souls? Do we bestow rights to them? So this was a debate within the Spanish society at that particular point, because what the Catholic Church did, the Catholic Church started recognizing the Native Americans as human beings with souls, meaning that you cannot exterminate these people like animals. You have to treat them as human beings, and they can be converted to the Catholic faith. So if we look at that specific landscape and we bring it all the way to 1652, then it's almost like 100 years that there was a debate in Europe before. And then there's this idea that the apartheid project is a unique thing that only happened in South Africa. Actually, it's a lie, and the book also goes into that specific lie. The apartheid project as we see it in South Africa, it's actually different groups of colonial systems that later merge into one apartheid project. And one of them that a lot of people doesn't want to give recognition and scholars to is the Jim Crow laws in the American South. So years before there was the segregated system in South Africa, that system was already taking place in the American South. But what a lot of people forget, they talk about past laws as a apartheid thing. But past laws was in South Africa from the 1800s already. Slave people were the first to carry passes. Then the second group of people who carried passes was Khoi or San people. Now, if you go into historical documents, you won't find Khoi. There's no way you will find a Khoi person. You won't find a San person. You will find two groups, Hottentot and Bushman. Hottentot is now what people refer to as Khoi people. So Hottentot equals Khoi and Bushman equals San people. The reason why we got to this specific categories now is because within the university, it decided we cannot use Hottentot anymore and we can't use Bushman anymore because it hurts a group of people. So a lot of people are more familiar with Bushman and Hottentot because Hottentot is a shorter version of Hottentot. They're more familiar in their families with those terms than they are familiar with Khoi and San. So when I speak about the Khoi people, I'm literally speaking about what people used to understand as Hottentot people. So the Hottentot people and the Bushman people, or the Khoi and San people, were the second group of people in South Africa that had to carry passes. And there was a proclamation that was signed in that was passed in 1809. It called the Hottentot Proclamation. The Hottentot Proclamation forces the Khoi people to carry passes with them. So if you're in the borders of the Cape Colony, you had to carry a pass with you, saying that you're a Hottentot person and that you had a master. Some farmer or the magistrate or some missionary controlled your movements, and they were not allowed to move outside the borders of the Cape Colony to join other groups like the Korana, the Nama, the Honakwa in the Eastern Cape, the Griqua, because they needed labor in the Cape Colony. Because in 1806, the British Empire abolished the slave trade throughout the British Empire. So there was a massive labor shortage in South Africa. And the only way to supplement that labor shortage was but they put in system indentured labor of the Khoi and San people. There was an amendment that they made to that specific proclamation in 1812. It's called the apprenticeship principle, where they started focusing on Khoi and San children. So I'm taking you slowly from 1809 up until 1828. So by 1828, you have massive groups of people staying on farms of colonialists. They were some missionary societies. They were regarded as Khoi or Hottentot or Bushman people, and they were then started being classified as colored people. And then later on, systematically, with the missionary societies, even on those missionary societies, they started including that people into the colored identity. So currently, what I'm telling you now about is research that I'm currently doing. So the book takes you from the long history until Thabo Mbeki's I'm an African speech. And it takes you to that particular moment because the question remains, who is the Khoikhoi and San people in South Africa, and can we regard that group of people as Africans. Thabo Mbeki was one of those forward thinkers who already started saying that there needs to be a kind of universal African identity. So if you closely listen to Thabo Mbeki's speech, then the African to Thabo Mbeki is not just the black person. It's everyone in South Africa in 1996. And a lot of people misses that specific part of that particular thing. So if we at that moment in time had an intervention and moved towards a common African identity away from a South African identity, then all of the problems that we currently face in South Africa when it comes to race, xenophobia, and all of this would have been gone. But there was this argument that yes, there needs to be justice. Things happen in the past, and the only way we'll get justice is through affirmative action, black economic empowerment, and that's the particular argument. And a lot of people over the years have been empowered through that X. But the question that I'm coming towards is, on what trajectory is South Africa? So, as you heard from my introduction, I'm a political scientist. So my PhD focused on political conflicts on the African continent, especially the one in the DRC, Eastern DRC, between various groups. The reason why I chose that particular conflict, because at one moment in time in South Africa's history, I was in the DRC as a peacekeeper. I was part of that specific UNESCO force, where I could see the devastating violence that is taking place between groups, where groups with colonial identities start playing each other as the victim or the perpetrator, and then start killing. That creates an endless cycle of violence where there is no escape. So this brings me to what I'm currently busy with. So currently what I'm busy with is I'm focusing on the fluidity of pre-colonial identities. So a lot of people think that there was this racial classification pre-colonial. There was no racial classification. Identities was fluid. You could be Xhosa and then you could be Honakwa. Honakwa is a group of Khoikhoi people from now Gqeberha, but used to be Port Elizabeth, to Port Beaufort. So they stayed in that specific area. They called it the Eastern Frontier. And they closely lived together. They spoke the same languages. They had the same families. Makanda, the town that was renamed, was a person that was Honakwa and Xhosa. Fluid identity. And even David Stearman, which the airport in Gqeberha was named after, had that fluid identity. And if you go even further, then you would see that their identities was fluid. So which brings me to the Khoikhoi identity, especially the Khoikhoi identity. The Khoikhoi identity was introduced by the Nama, and that's how it comes in. So people ask us, who is the Hottentot? So he said, we are not Hottentot, we actually Khoikhoi people, meaning proper human beings. So the Khoikhoi identity was never a racial identity. It was the identity that was fluid, that different groups of people could get. So it means if you were a slave, you could become a Khoikhoi person. If you are a frontier colonist, you could become a Khoikhoi person. If you were mixed, you could become a Khoikhoi person. There was customary laws and rules that you had to adhere to. And once you adhere to that, then you are accepted into that Khoikhoi society. So this idea that the Khoikhoi and San people looks like those things that you see in the museum is a very racist type of science that took place in Namibia, especially with the Nama and Herero genocide in Namibia, where Leonard Schultz said there is a Hottentot race, and this Hottentot race is going to, what I'm going to name them is Khoisan. So these groups, I don't recognize that this group, the Khoikhoi people and the San group, are two different entities. They have their own religions, they have their own languages, they are not a common person. What Leonard Cloete wanted to do was to prove that this group of people is racially the same. And he introduced the term Khoisan, and today, in the present, we are stuck with that problematic Khoisan identity, which is fast replacing the problematic racist colored identity. If we go down the route of recognizing people as Khoisan, then we don't deal with the problems that we are facing within the colored identity. If we go down specific racial identities, like black, colored, Indian in South Africa for much longer, then we might end up in a situation that we currently see across Africa. And that, for me, is not a viable option. So, for me, the viable option is we need to have a different conversation about a common identity in Africa. And then we need to have a conversation about what can we do about the historical injustice. So that is me, and that's my book. Thank you very much.